The mahogany grandfather clock in father's study chimed 9 times as I sat across from him, watching his weathered hands tremble as he held the legal documents. The oxygen tank beside his wheelchair hissed softly, a constant reminder of the lung disease that had been stealing his breath for months. At 26, I had always been the reliable daughter, the one who stayed close to home, who managed his medications, who held his hand through the dark nights when breathing became a struggle. "Emma," he wheezed, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something important about your inheritance." My heart clenched. We both knew his time was running short, but hearing him speak so directly about it still felt like ice water in my veins. I leaned forward, taking his cold hand in mine. "The business, the house, the investments, it's all been divided equally between you and Victoria in my will," he continued, pausing to catch his breath. "But there's something else, something I've kept separate." He gestured weakly toward the safe behind his desk. "The combination is your mother's birthday. Inside, you'll find certificates for shares in Meridian Holdings. Your mother invested in them years ago, before she passed. They weren't worth much then, but—" He smiled weakly. "Sometimes patience pays off. Those shares are worth nearly $2 million now." My breath caught. "Father, they're yours, Emma. All of them. Victoria has her career, her success. But you sacrificed so much to take care of me. This is my way of ensuring you're secure." His grip tightened on my hand. "The certificates are in your name only. I had them transferred last month." Tears blurred my vision. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." His eyes, though dimmed by illness, held fierce determination. "Promise me something. Don't tell Victoria about these shares until after. After I'm gone. She wouldn't understand. She'd see it as unfair." I nodded, though something twisted uneasily in my stomach. Victoria was my older sister by 3 years, a successful marketing executive who lived across the country. She visited occasionally, always immaculate in her designer suits, always checking her phone, always eager to return to her important life. We had grown apart over the years, but she was still my sister. "I promise, Father." He died peacefully 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, while I was reading to him from his favorite Dickens novel. The funeral was a blur of condolences and casseroles, of Victoria's dramatic grief, and her husband Marcus's awkward attempts at comfort. My sister threw herself into the role of the bereaved daughter with theatrical precision, her black Chanel dress and perfectly applied makeup making her look like she'd stepped off a magazine cover, even in mourning. The will reading took place the following Monday, in Mr. Hartwell's law office downtown. Victoria sat rigidly beside Marcus, her manicured fingers drumming impatiently on her clutch purse as the lawyer droned through the legal language. When he reached the main provisions, the house, the business, the savings accounts, all split equally between us, she nodded with satisfied approval. "Is that everything?" Victoria asked briskly, already reaching for her purse. Mr. Hartwell glanced at me, his eyebrows raised slightly. According to Father's instructions, the Meridian Holdings shares weren't mentioned in the will. They had been transferred to me months before his death, making them legally mine, regardless of any testament. "Yes," I said quietly, "that covers everything in the will." We spent the next few days going through Father's possessions, dividing items with the careful politeness of two people trying to avoid conflict. Victoria wanted the antique furniture and the expensive artwork. I took his books, his photographs, and the small personal items that held memories more precious than money. On Thursday evening, as we sat in Father's kitchen sharing a bottle of his favorite wine, Victoria's mask slipped slightly. "You know," she said, swirling the burgundy liquid in her glass, "I've been thinking about the business. Maybe we should sell it." "The market's good right now," I frowned. "Father built that company from nothing. He always hoped one of us would—" "Emma, be realistic. You don't know anything about running a business, and I live 3,000 miles away. We could get at least 800,000 for it, maybe more." The dismissive way she said it, as if Father's life's work was just another asset to liquidate, made my chest tighten. But I kept my voice level. "Let me think about it." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. "There's nothing to think about. We both need the money. You need money? But your job—" "My job is fine," she snapped, then caught herself and forced a smile. "I just think it's the practical choice. Father would understand, but I knew Father wouldn't understand. He'd built that company hoping to leave us something meaningful, something that would connect us to his memory. The thought of selling it to the highest bidder felt like betrayal. The next morning, Victoria knocked on my bedroom door at 7 a.m., already dressed in another expensive suit. "I'm flying back to Seattle today," she announced. "But I've been doing some research on the business. I found a buyer who's very interested." "Victoria," I said I needed time to think. "I've scheduled a meeting for next week. This buyer is serious, Emma. We can't let an opportunity like this slip away." She perched on the edge of my bed, her expression suddenly urgent. "Look, I know this is hard, but holding on to things because of sentiment isn't practical." Father was a practical man. Something in her tone set off alarm bells in my mind, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. "I'll think about it while you're gone." "Don't think too long," she said, kissing my cheek with lips that felt cold as marble. Opportunities like this don't last forever. After Victoria left, the house felt strangely empty. I spent the day in Father's study, surrounded by the smell of his old leather books and the faint lingering scent of his pipe tobacco. That evening, I remembered his words about the safe and decided it was time to retrieve the Meridian Holding certificates. The safe opened easily with Mother's birthday. Inside, along with some family documents and jewelry, I found a manila envelope with my name written in Father's careful script. My hands shook as I opened it and saw the stock certificates. 2,500 shares of Meridian Holdings, all in my name, dated 3 months before Father's death. But there was something else in the envelope. A letter, also in Father's handwriting. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've discovered the shares. I want you to understand why I made this decision. Victoria has always been driven by ambition and material success. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's made her hard in ways that worry me. You, on the other hand, have the gentleness and wisdom your mother had. These shares represent not just money, but security and freedom to choose your own path. I've watched Victoria over the years, and I fear that knowing about this inheritance would bring out the worst in her. She would see it as unfair, even though she's already financially successful. Please be careful whom you trust with this information. Use this gift wisely, my dear girl. Your mother would be so proud of who you've become. All my love, Father." I read the letter 3 times, each time feeling the weight of his words more heavily. Father had known Victoria better than I'd realized. He'd seen something in her that I'd been too loyal, too hopeful to acknowledge. The next few weeks passed quietly. I took time off from my job at the local library to handle Father's affairs and decide what to do with the house. Victoria called regularly, always steering the conversation back to the business sale. Her buyer was getting impatient, she said. We needed to move quickly. "I'll be back next month to finalize everything," she told me during one of our phone calls. "I hope you've come to your senses about this, Emma. We can't let emotion cloud our judgment." It was during that month, while Victoria was back in Seattle, that I discovered the first signs of her deception. I had gone to Father's office building to collect some personal items he'd kept in his desk. Mrs. Patterson, his longtime secretary, greeted me with red-rimmed eyes. "Oh, Emma dear, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your father was such a good man." She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I was so surprised when Victoria came by last week. I thought she was still in Seattle." My blood went cold. "Victoria was here? When?" "Last Tuesday, I think it was. She said she was handling some business matters for the estate. She spent quite a bit of time going through your father's files." Mrs. Patterson looked confused by my obvious shock. "She said you knew about it, that you'd asked her to come." I forced a smile, my mind racing. "Of course." I must have forgotten with everything that's been going on, but I hadn't forgotten anything. Victoria had told me she was in Seattle all month. What had she been looking for in Father's files? That evening, I drove to the office building after hours, using Father's key to let myself into his private office. Everything looked normal at first glance, but as I examined his desk more carefully, I noticed that his filing cabinet had been disturbed. Papers that Father always kept in perfect alphabetical order were slightly out of place. In his personal files, I found what Victoria had been looking for, a folder labeled Meridian Holdings that contained copies of research reports, dividend statements, and correspondence with his financial advisor about the potential value of the shares. Someone had gone through the folder carefully, but a few papers were missing. My hands trembled as I realized what this meant. Victoria knew about the shares. Somehow, she'd discovered Father's secret, and she'd lied to me about being in Seattle while she came here to investigate. The next morning, I called Father's financial advisor, Mr. Reynolds. "Emma, I'm so sorry for your loss," he said when I identified myself. "Your father was a remarkable man. I was just telling your sister Victoria what a wise investment those Meridian Holdings shares turned out to be." The world seemed to tilt. You spoke with Victoria?" "Yes, she called last week. She had questions about the current value of the shares and the transfer process. She said she was helping you understand the inheritance." There was a pause. I hope I didn't overstep. She seemed very knowledgeable about the family's financial affairs. "No, that's fine," I managed. "Thank you." But it wasn't fine. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than I could have imagined. Victoria not only knew about the shares, but was actively investigating them, lying to me while gathering information behind my back. The phone rang that evening. Victoria's voice was honey-sweet with false concern. "Emma, darling, how are you holding up? I know these past few weeks have been difficult." "I'm managing," I said carefully. "Good, good. Listen, I have some wonderful news about the business sale. The buyer has increased his offer to $900,000. Can you believe it? We're going to be quite well off." "Victoria," I said slowly, "is there anything else about Father's estate that we need to discuss?" There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "What do you mean?" "Just making sure we've covered everything. All the assets, all the accounts." "Of course we have. Why would you think otherwise?" Her voice had a slight edge now. "Emma, you're not having second thoughts about the sale, are you?" "Because I've already given the buyer our word." "You gave him our word without consulting me?" "I thought we'd agreed." "We hadn't agreed to anything, Victoria. I told you I needed time to think." "Well, you've had time. And frankly, Emma, this is a business decision. I have experience with these things. You don't." The false sweetness was evaporating, replaced by something harder. "Sometimes you have to trust people who know better than you do." After she hung up, I sat in Father's kitchen, staring at the phone and finally seeing my sister clearly for the first time. The Victoria I'd idealized, the successful older sister I'd always looked up to, was a fiction. The real Victoria was someone who would lie, sneak, and manipulate to get what she wanted. But I still had no idea how far she was willing to go. I found out the next week when I received a call from Mr. Hartwell, Father's lawyer. "Emma, I need to see you immediately. There's been a development regarding your father's estate." His office felt different this time, charged with tension. Mr. Hartwell's usually composed demeanor was strained as he gestured for me to sit down. "I received a call from Victoria yesterday," he began carefully. "She's claiming that there are additional assets in your father's estate that weren't disclosed during the will reading. Specifically, she mentioned shares in something called Meridian Holdings." My heart pounded, but I kept my expression neutral. "Oh?" "She says she found documents indicating these shares exist, and she's demanding they be included in the equal distribution of assets." Mr. Hartwell leaned forward. "Emma, these shares were legally transferred to you months before your father's death. They're not part of the estate." But Victoria is quite insistent. "What exactly is she saying?" "She's claiming that your father was mentally incompetent when he made the transfer, and that you manipulated him into giving you an unfair advantage." His voice was tight with disapproval. "She's threatening to contest the entire will if these shares aren't divided equally between you." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Victoria wasn't just trying to take the shares. She was attacking Father's memory and my integrity to get them. "She's hired a lawyer," Mr. Hartwell continued, "a very expensive one from Seattle. They're building a case based on your father's illness and your proximity to him during his final months." "Are you saying she might win?" "Honestly, it's possible. Will contests can be ugly, expensive affairs. Even if you ultimately prevail, the legal costs could eat up much of the inheritance. And the stress?" He shook his head. "Sometimes it's easier to negotiate a settlement." That evening, Victoria called again. This time, she didn't bother with false sweetness. "I know about the shares, Emma." I said nothing. $2 million, and you were going to keep it all to yourself. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" "Father wanted me to have them," I said quietly. "Father was dying and on medication. You took advantage of a sick old man." Her voice was cold with accusation. "But I'm willing to be reasonable. Split the shares with me, and I won't pursue this any further." And if I don't, then I'll drag this through court for years. I'll prove that you manipulated father, that you isolated him from his other daughter, that you used his illness to steal from the family." Victoria's voice grew venomous. "By the time I'm done, everyone in this pathetic little town will know what kind of person you really are." The threat hung in the air like poison. I thought of father, of his gentle hands and kind eyes, of the way he'd worried about Victoria's hardness. He tried to protect me from exactly this situation. "I need time to think," I said. "You have 48 hours. After that, my lawyer files the motion to contest the will." She hung up before I could respond. I spent that night walking through father's house, touching the furniture he'd built, the photographs he'd treasured, the books he'd read to me as a child. In the morning, I called Mr. Hartwell and told him I would split the shares with Victoria. The legal papers were drawn up quickly. Victoria flew in from Seattle, all businesslike efficiency and barely concealed triumph. As we signed the documents that would give her half of what father had intended only for me, she actually smiled. "You made the right choice, Emma. Family is more important than money, don't you think?" The hypocrisy of it was breathtaking, but I said nothing. I signed my name with steady hands and watched as Victoria walked away with nearly $1 million that she'd stolen through lies and threats. But karma, I've learned, has its own timeline. 3 months later, I received a check for my half of the Meridian Holdings shares and used part of it to buy a small marketing company that was struggling after its owner's retirement. It wasn't father's business. Victoria had succeeded in forcing that sale too, but it was a fresh start. I renamed it Hartwell Communications, after both my father and the lawyer, who tried to protect me. The company specialized in digital marketing for small businesses, something I taught myself during the quiet months after father's death. I hired 3 employees, a talented graphic designer, a social media specialist, and a content writer who reminded me of myself at 22, eager, hardworking, and underestimated. Meanwhile, Victoria's life in Seattle was beginning to unravel, though I didn't learn about it until much later. The first sign came 6 months after she'd extorted half the shares from me. I was working late at the office when I received an unexpected call from Marcus, Victoria's husband. "Emma, I'm sorry to bother you, but I didn't know who else to call." His voice sounded strained, exhausted. "Victoria, she's been having some problems at work." "What kind of problems?" "She was let go last month. Some kind of ethics violation involving a client's confidential information." He paused. "The thing is, she's been lying to me about it. She's been leaving every morning as if she's going to work, but she's actually been... I don't know what she's been doing." My heart sank despite everything Victoria had done to me. "Marcus, I'm sorry. Is there anything I can do? I just thought you should know. She's been talking about moving back to your town, maybe asking you for work." His voice dropped. "Emma, she's not the same person I married. The money from those shares, it's like it changed something in her. She's become obsessed with get-rich-quick schemes, high-risk investments. We've lost almost everything." After Marcus hung up, I sat in my quiet office and felt something I hadn't expected. Pity for my sister. She'd gotten what she wanted, the money she'd fought so hard for, and it had poisoned everything it touched. Victoria called me 2 weeks later. "Emma, I've been thinking about moving back home." Her voice was carefully casual, but I could hear the desperation underneath. "Seattle's gotten so expensive, and Marcus and I thought a change of scenery might be nice." "I see. I heard through the grapevine that you started your own business." That's wonderful. I'm proud of you." The words sounded like they were being extracted from her with pliers. "I was wondering if you might have any openings." My experience in marketing could be valuable to a small company like yours. The irony was so perfect, it almost took my breath away. Victoria, who had stolen half of father's legacy and called me incompetent, was now asking me for a job. "I'll have to think about it," I said. Of course. I just thought, we're family after all. Family. The word she'd weaponized against me was now her lifeline. I did think about it. I thought about father's letter, about his warning that Victoria would bring out the worst in herself. I thought about the pain of her betrayal, the sleepless nights, the way she'd attacked his memory to get what she wanted. But I also thought about who I wanted to be, not who Victoria had tried to make me, but who father had raised me to become. When I called her back, I offered her a position as a junior marketing associate. It was entry-level work, far below what she'd been doing in Seattle, but it was a job. The salary was modest, the work challenging, and the hierarchy clear. She would be working for me. Victoria arrived in town on a gray Tuesday in November, driving a car that had seen better days and carrying herself with a brittle pride that couldn't quite hide her desperation. Her designer wardrobe had been replaced with department store clothes. Her perfect manicure was chipped, and her eyes held a haunted quality I'd never seen before. "Thank you for this opportunity," she said stiffly, as I showed her to her desk, a simple workstation in the main office, far from the executive suite she'd once inhabited. "I know I can contribute meaningfully to the company." "I'm sure you can," I replied. "Let me introduce you to the team." Watching Victoria try to adapt to her new reality was both painful and illuminating. She struggled with tasks she'd once supervised others to complete. She bristled at taking direction from people younger and less experienced than herself. Most telling of all, she seemed genuinely confused by the collaborative, supportive culture I'd built at Hartwell Communications. "Why do you spend so much time mentoring the junior staff?" she asked me one afternoon. "It's not efficient." "Because helping people grow is part of what makes work meaningful," I replied. She stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. The months that followed were a masterclass in karma's patient justice. Victoria, who had always believed that ruthless ambition was the key to success, found herself working under the sister she'd once dismissed as naive. The money she'd stolen through lies and threats was gone, spent on failed investments and Marcus's attempt to start a consulting business that never got off the ground. But perhaps the cruelest irony of all was that Victoria was actually good at her job when she stopped trying to manipulate and scheme her way to the top. Her marketing skills were strong, her work ethic solid when properly directed. Under my guidance, and yes, I recognize the beautiful symmetry of that, she began to rediscover abilities that had been corrupted by years of viewing every interaction as a zero-sum competition. The turning point came 8 months after she'd started working for me. We were preparing a major presentation for a potential client, and Victoria had stayed late to help with the final preparations. As we worked side by side in the empty office, she suddenly stopped typing and looked at me. "Emma," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology." I continued working, unsure if I was ready for whatever was coming. What I did with father's shares, it was wrong. I knew it was wrong when I was doing it, but I couldn't stop myself. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I told myself you didn't deserve them, that father was being unfair, but the truth is I was just angry that he saw something in you that he didn't see in me." I finally looked up from my computer. Victoria's eyes were red-rimmed. Her usual perfect composure cracked wide open. "I spent my whole life trying to prove I was worth his pride, and in the end, he gave his most precious gift to you because you didn't need to prove anything. You just loved him." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "And I hated you for that." The words hung between us in the quiet office. Outside, the streetlights had come on, casting long shadows through the windows. "Victoria," I said carefully, "why are you telling me this now?" "Because I've been watching you run this company, watching how you treat people, and I finally understand what father saw." She met my eyes directly. "You're the person I always thought I was, but never actually became." It would be a lie to say that Victoria's apology erased all the pain she'd caused. The betrayal had cut too deep for simple words to heal completely. But sitting there in that quiet office, I saw something I'd never seen before. Genuine remorse, and perhaps the beginning of the sister I'd always hoped she could be. "The shares are gone," I said gently. "The money, the inheritance, none of that matters anymore. I know, and I can't undo what I did." Victoria straightened slightly, and for the first time in months, she looked like the strong woman I remembered from our childhood. "But I can try to be better going forward, if you'll let me." Over the following year, Victoria slowly rebuilt her life and, more importantly, her character. She and Marcus divorced amicably. They'd both realized that the foundation of their marriage had been ambition rather than love. She moved into a small apartment in town and threw herself into her work with a dedication that had nothing to do with personal advancement and everything to do with genuine contribution. She never did regain her executive status or her six-figure salary. But something remarkable happened instead. She began to find satisfaction in work itself. rather than in the status it provided. She mentored junior employees with the same patience I'd once shown her. She took on pro bono projects for local nonprofits. She slowly, carefully, began to rebuild relationships with the people she'd hurt in her climb to the top. The final act of karma came 2 years after Victoria had started working for me. Hartwell Communications had grown into one of the region's most respected marketing firms, built on principles of integrity and collaboration that father would have admired. We were celebrating the successful completion of our largest contract to date when Victoria approached me at the company party. "Emma, I have something for you," she said, pulling out a legal envelope. Inside were documents transferring a small parcel of land back to me, property that had been part of father's estate, that Victoria had insisted on selling during our bitter dispute over the shares. "I bought it back," she explained quietly. "It took me 2 years to save up the money, but I thought maybe you'd like to build something there, something father would have been proud of." The land wasn't worth much in monetary terms, but its value to me was immeasurable. It was the plot where father had planned to build a small workshop where he could pursue woodworking in his retirement. Victoria had remembered that dream, and in her own way, she was trying to honor it. Standing there at the party, surrounded by employees who had become like family, looking at my sister who had finally found her way back to being someone worthy of love and respect, I felt something I hadn't experienced since father's death: complete peace. Karma, I realized, isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about restoration, not just of balance, but of the people we're meant to be. Victoria had taken something precious from me through lies and manipulation, but in the end, karma had given me something even more valuable: a sister worth having, a business built on principles rather than profit, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that dignity and kindness ultimately triumph over greed and deceit. The grandfather clock in father's old study, now relocated to my office, chimed 9 times as I finished writing this story. Outside, the autumn leaves were falling like golden memories, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear Victoria's laughter as she worked late with the graphic design team on a project that would help a local charity reach more families in need. Father had been right about so many things, but perhaps most importantly, he'd been right about the power of patience. Justice doesn't always come swiftly, but when it arrives, it tends to be more perfect than anything we could have orchestrated ourselves. Victoria had taken my share of the fortune, but karma had given me something infinitely more valuable: the knowledge that integrity is its own reward, and that sometimes the greatest victory is not in defeating your enemies, but in helping them become better than they ever thought possible. In the end, we both got exactly what we deserved: